Hi everyone, Sarah here from Sarah Homfray Embroidery, and in this week's video I want to look at sampling, what it is and why you need to do it. And I've wanted to make this video for a while. We did make a video short on it last year, and it became obvious that we really need to do a whole video on this because it's definitely something you should all be doing. So I want to read you a couple of comments that I've had on YouTube, because this is where it all kind of came from really, and there's a little bit of a theme going on. So I'm just going to read you a few. I'm planning a project and know me, it's way too complicated. I put off trying this for years, but you made it look easier than I thought. I've always wanted to try hard angler embroidery, but was put off by the thought of cutting the threads. I've had so much trouble stitching metallic threads, I just gave up on them. Which stitch is best for making letters on fine cotton? I'm relatively new to the world of embroidery and this seems super intimidating. I get so frustrated as I'm a beginner and I just need the confidence to get started on something. So there's a bit of a theme going on here, centred around being frightened to get going, not knowing what to do when you do get going, making a mistake. There's definitely fear of making a mistake, and they're not knowing what kind of threads and materials to use. What stitch do I use for this? What material do I use for that? So I want to look at that and in the context of sampling and how that can help you. Okay, so what do I mean by sampling? So you might be familiar with traditional samplers. You'll have seen them in museums and in books, usually designed for young girls to learn different embroidery stitches and different patterns, and they would do this as a form of schooling. But the problem with these samplers is that they became finished items, and as soon as you make something finished, it's got to be a finished thing that can be displayed. Then you put pressure on the embroiderer to make it a finished thing and make it this perfect thing. So what I want to do is look at samplers in their true form. So for sampling, for trying out things, for trying different stitches and different materials and different threads, and as an actual tool to help you with your stitching. So I think the best thing to do is to show you a sampler that I have done, and this is where I spoil the illusion somewhat, that I just sit down with a frame and some threads and 10 minutes later I have a video, because it doesn't work like that. This is how it actually works. So I do think about my videos quite hard, and I do plan them out, and I do think carefully about what I'm going to put in them. So this is one that I have done. Now you may recognise these letters, you may have seen this video, 5 stitches for lettering, and then we did 5 more stitches for lettering, one of our most popular videos, and I wanted to show, a lot of people wanted to do lettering, and I wanted to show what stitches might be good for this. So I didn't just sit down with 5 letters and go, oh, this will be great. I did actually try some first. So here's my little sampler of that. So you can see I've got my letters here. So I just used my initials, just because it's a good place to start, just to try out some different stitches. Now there are loads of stitches I could have used for this, and I had to just pick 5. So the only way I'm going to know which 5 is to actually try them out, is to actually sample them. And you can see how I've done that on here. So I started with, I think this is a heavy chain stitch here, raised chain here. Decided that was probably a bit thick, and I've done a little bit of stem stitch here. I've got a different stitch on the J altogether, and quite like that one. I did the whole letter in that one. Here's a little bit of Palestrina stitch, and I don't need to do a lot of it just to decide if it was the right stitch or not. I just did a little bit here and thought, yeah, I like that stitch, don't need to do all of it. And then a different stitch here. So this is a cable chain on the same side of the same letter actually, and just trying these things out. There's other stuff going on here as well. There's smaller stitches, smaller letters that I tried out just to make sure I'd got the right stitches that I wanted to use. And you can see that this is a real working piece. It's not particularly pretty, it's not finished, it's got other stuff going on here, which I just thought I'd like to try. I've got my frame handy. I pick my frame up, try a few stitches on it, and then I clear in my head whether I want to do that or not. So they're not always necessarily the same project. There's lots of different projects going on here as well. And I just tried some straight stitches across the bottom as well. I know a lot of stitches, but I don't use them all the time, and sometimes you forget how to start. People think I have all these stitches at my fingertip, and I don't, and I have to think, oh, how do I work that stitch? So a little practice beforehand just reminds me how to do it and how to get started. So I'm not doing that on the camera, and you have to watch me going, oh, how do I do this stitch again? So I've used a sampler in this case to try out some different stitches, but there's lots of other ways that a sampler can help you as well. So let's have a look at a few of those. So one of the best things that it does is, mainly for especially you beginners out there, is to take away that fear of stitching. So you'll have heard in some of those comments that people are scared to get going, and you've bought a new embroidery kit and it's all nice and pristine and you've got your beautiful threads and you've never done it before and you've got to leap in and do it on your actual thing. If you do some sampling first, you can just practice some fundamentals. So you can practice threading your needle, even how to start and finish your threads. You can try a little bit of the stitch and make sure that you know what you're doing and you're understanding before you go onto your main one. So it's absolutely brilliant for starting and just getting over that fear of having a nice, fresh, clean piece of fabric with no stitching on it. So another thing it does is it kind of acts as a warm-up. So you wouldn't go for a run without warming your muscles up first. So consider this the embroidery equivalent to that, really. You're sitting down to stitch for the day or the hour or however long it is you've got to stitch, and you need to warm your fingers up. You know, your fingers are taking a lot of strain if you do a lot of stitching. You need to get your muscles going and your fingers going. Your hand-eye coordination needs to be tuned in as well. So this is a great way of doing that. Just do a few stitches first. It can be intimidating just to go straight in and think, where did I get to yesterday, or what am I doing now? And I can guarantee the first few stitches, the first few French knots will be the worst ones. So do those on a little sampler. Just get your hands warmed up. Just get back into the frame of mind. What was I doing and how was I doing it? And then when you've done that, you're ready to jump onto your main one. Sampling is a great place to have a little play with things. Now, when I was on my apprenticeship, we worked very, very intensely and we didn't really do much play. It was learning these specific techniques and these specific stitches, and you didn't have long to do it, and you basically did leap in and do it on your finished piece, which when I look back on it was quite daunting. And you need to allow yourself time to play with different threads and different stitches and see what you might like to use. Otherwise you just end up using the same things again and again. So this is a great place to do that. So I'm often getting asked questions like, how many threads do I use for such and such a stitch, or what fabric do I use for trying out embroidery on? And I don't always know the answer to those questions. If somebody says, how many strands do I need to stitch a flower? I don't know either. I would get a couple of strands and a bit of fabric and I'd try it out and go, oh no, that's not enough, that's too many. So that is how I would do it as well. So really great for you to try that too. Another thing that sampling does is helps to save your thread. Now that might seem a bit of a contradiction because you're using threads to do your sampling with, but there's nothing more infuriating than going onto a beautiful piece you want to stitch and starting to stitch and you've not tried out the number of threads you want to use, or the colour's not quite right and you've got to pull it all out and start again. And a couple of centimetres of stitching on a sampler, you've worked that out. You don't have to do it in your most expensive thread either. So if you were doing a project in silk, you could practice it in cotton. And then you can practice what stitches you want to do. And when you're happy, then you can pick up your silk threads, which are expensive, and then you can work it in your silk. So it will save you on threads in the long run. It will also help to build up your confidence. Now, I have seen people do a whole version of something as a practice piece and then do the finished piece as well, and I think you don't really need to do that. I've done that on a couple of occasions for videos. I've made a project, I thought, oh, I'm not really sure about the colours, or I want to just change something, so I may have done that a few times, and I always stitch my pieces first to make sure that they work. So sometimes I end up with two, but it's not absolutely necessary, but practice does make perfect. So do practice a little bit first, even if it's just a little bit of each stitch, so you're confident that you know what you're doing, and then you can go on to your main piece and do it much better on that main piece. So practice makes perfect. There's no way around that. I've done lots of practice. People think, oh, you know, your stitches are so neat. It's hours and hours and hours of stitching it. So whether you practice on your sampler or your main one, but I do suggest doing it on the sampler first. So the last one that I want to mention is learning a new technique. Now, you don't know if you're going to like something until you try it, but are you going to go and buy all the things that you need and a beautiful design and then start to do it and think, oh, you know, I don't really like this technique, or I'm not really sure what I'm doing, great to try a little bit first, see if you like doing it. So the hardanger embroidery is a good example. If you've seen our hardanger videos, you have to cut the threads in the hardanger embroidery technique, and I know how scary that is, and some of these comments I read earlier actually come from that video. I'm too scared to do it in case I cut the wrong thread. And actually in that video I start with a small sampler, just a very small bit of fabric, trying out the techniques, trying out the stitches, and if you cut it and you cut the wrong thread, it doesn't matter. You've just done it on a sample, you've tried it. But if you went in on a main piece and then you've got to cut your threads and it's too petrifying, you're too scared, and you never finish it and it goes in the drawer and you never see it again. So definitely some techniques, definitely try a little sample of them first to A, see if you like it, and B, just take away that fear of the processes involved so you know that you can actually do them. So how do you actually make a sampler? So there's no hard and fast rules, and I do know some people who frame up a beautiful frame with a piece of fabric and they have everything they need and they try all their samples on that, and they do look quite beautiful, but I think that defeats the idea of the object really. And again, suddenly you're starting to, oh, it's got to look neat and it's got to be a finished thing, and then in comes that fear of messing it up and getting it wrong. So you've seen that first one that I did. It literally is a bit of fabric in a frame. I'm not worried about what it looks like. It really is just for practicing on. But I think the best way to talk about this is to show you some more samples that I've done for specific projects, and I would like to add that this is the way I do it. I'm sure other people have other ways of doing it, other ways are available, but I'm just going to show you some of the ways that I do it. So I split my samples up into different categories, so I'm trying something different in each one to show you how you can use it across the board, and it's not just for practicing stitches. We'll look at stitches first before we get on to the other ones, and you might remember this video. So this is my 10 stitches for leaves video. I didn't just sit down with a piece of fabric and rustle up 10 different leaves. That's not how it worked. I had a good idea of what stitches I wanted to use, but I wanted to try out the colours, and I wanted to try out the stitches with the different shapes to see what was best. So this is my actual sampler I did for this. So you can see my workings, as it were. So some of them have come out okay. I finished the whole thing and I've gone, yep, I'm fine with that one. Some of them I just did half of it, went, yeah, that's all I need to do to know that that stitch works. Some of them I've been trying out different colours on, which thread do I need to use, how many strands do I need to use, and often in my videos as well I have to consider whether you can see it on the camera or not. So is the thread thick enough for you to see clearly? So I have other things to think about, but you will in your projects too. Are you making it for somebody? Is it going to be seen from a distance? Are you going to have to use it? So you'll have other considerations that you need to take into account too. I tried this one a couple of times. I wasn't so familiar with the stitch here, so I tried it in 2 strands and decided that was confusing, and then just did it in 1 colour here. Decided that came out much better. Here's me practicing my bullion knots. How many strands do I need for my bullions so that they come out nice and smoothly and they fill in the shape? So I had to make the stitch fill in the shape as well. I tried this little one a few times just with different colours and different strands to see what I needed to do. And I didn't fill it all in, as you can see. I've left some of it, some of the leaves I didn't even try, and some of them I did enough to know that it was going to work, and I was ready to go on to my actual one. So I just go back to the original, and then I was able to do this one as well. So I worked it all out beforehand so that when I could sit down in front of the camera I knew exactly what I was stitching. I knew what result I was going to get, and I knew that that would be the best for you to watch as well, so you didn't have to watch all that other process. So here's another video you might be familiar with. This is my peacock video. So this was a couple of videos, it was 3 in fact. So we did how to fill in open spaces, how to fill in solid shapes, and then some gold work outlines. So this one took quite a bit of planning because I had 3 videos, and you can just show you this frame here. And you can see this isn't very beautiful, but it does the job I wanted it to do. So I wanted to try these stitches for inside the body, and you can see I just tried half of it to see if it worked. This is this one here, and then I decided that I wanted to put this pattern in because he was symmetrical. I didn't need to practice that again. I tried the stitch, I knew how the stitch worked. I thought, okay, now when he comes down the other side I'll change the pattern, and I was able to do that straight away. So just enough for me to know how to do that stitch on my piece. Little bit of satin stitch here. Didn't need to try much of that, done loads of satin stitch. This I played around with the colours, so the colours change quite a lot from here to here. So sometimes I'm looking at the colour, sometimes I'm looking at what thread do I want to use, sometimes I'm looking at the stitch, sometimes all three together. So a little bit of block shading here and a bit of long and short here. And you can see as well on this lots of other things going on. So this is also the sample I used for our 5 more stitches for lettering. You can see the 5 is there, and that says more. So I tried those stitches on here as well, and you might be able to spot another video in here. So here's a little heart, so I did some filling stitches for these as well, and try some different stitches out on here. So it's not even one sampler for one project, it's just a bit of fabric, have it to hand, leap in, it's there when I need to use it. So we had a look at some different ways of practicing stitches and threads, but sometimes you might want to try the fabric. Does it look different on a different fabric? This is an interesting example of that. So this was a project I made for the Victoria and Albert Museum Embroidery, a Maker's Guide book, and I wanted to make something that wasn't a wall hanging, so I chose to make some napkins, and I wanted to do it in this black work technique. Now you would normally do that on this even weave linen fabric here, and I did my design on that, but I just thought this isn't napkin material, you just wouldn't use this for a napkin, so I need to find another material that will work. So I got some hardanger fabric, which is much stiffer and much more like what you would use for a napkin, and you can also do counted work on it as well. So to make sure that that was going to look okay on this fabric, I actually stitched the whole thing again. This is the finished one, but I did do the whole sampler as one because they're the same size, so they come out the same design, but again just to try the fabric as well. So that really was just a case of trying out some different fabrics, seeing what would work best for the project that I wanted to make. So sometimes I don't have a specific project in mind, but I might have seen somebody work something and think, oh, that's really interesting, or I might be working on something and think, well, I'd really like to try that. So sometimes it's just have a little play and see what comes out with no specific end goal in mind. So here's some of the pieces that I've tried with that in mind. So this was a little ribbon work lady. I really love doing silk ribbon work, but it's nearly always flowers, and I just thought, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to make her a dress out of this silk ribbon? So I just drew a little figure. This is just a cotton backing, calico backing. Now most of my pieces are done on this, and I'll talk about that at nearer to the end. And I just drew the figure on and had a little go with it. It wasn't quite what I wanted. It was a bit too formal. I wanted it to be a bit more flowing, but I've got this little sampler now, and if I ever want to revisit this idea, I've got this. I can go back and have a look and think what was right about that and what was wrong, and improve on it. Or I may never see the light of day again, I don't know. But just a little sampler there, just to try out a technique, not worrying about finishing it and what it's going to look like. So this is another one that I don't even know what I did it for now. I can't remember what I did it for, but I was trying out some gold work techniques. Now, I would definitely say if you want to do gold work embroidery, you need to sample. You need to try out the techniques first, because they're not like any other embroidery technique. They're very different. They can be quite technical. The materials are different, so you definitely need to know how to handle the materials and how to use them, and to not be afraid of making a mistake using them while you learn the process of gold work. Definitely do sampling for gold work. And this is one I was obviously to try some petal shapes, and I've got a little bit of couching in the middle. I didn't do very much of it, and as you can see, the rest of it's here. This often happens, is I end up with bits of thread left on here, and this is starting to tarnish, so this has been on for a while, so I should probably cut that off really. But I just tried a little bit here with some edging and some couching and some stitching in it, so just playing with some ideas and trying to work out some ideas on my sample. I just want to show you the last one in this little section with some flowers. Now I saw somebody do these on the internet, Pinterest or somewhere, and I thought, oh, they look really pretty. I'd love to have a go at those. So just some overcast bars and making some little roses out of them. And I didn't want to do a whole design. I just wanted to try it and to see how to do it. It's always great to learn something new. There's always something new to learn as well, even for people who do it full time and do it as their job. And it's great to grab a bit of fabric and just try it and go, oh, that's really great. Today I've learned something new. Now I can make little roses. Now, I've done quite a lot of designing over the years now, and I'm fairly confident with it. And usually when I draw it in my sketchbook, I know that it's the right size. I know what scale to do it. I might make it bigger or smaller on the computer, but occasionally that doesn't always work. So I made this little sample here. Now, you may recognise this. This is a video that we have on this kite design, so the simple goldwork design. And I made this little kite and I thought, yeah, that's really cute. I really like that. But then I thought it's just a bit too small. I did this to try out the stitches and make sure I knew what I was doing for the video, but then I decided it was a bit small for the camera. This was going to be a little bit fiddly, so I made it a little bit bigger. I do actually think it lost something in that process, but it was better to show on the video and with the lettering as well. So sometimes you might need to try out the size of something. How big does it need to be to fit that technique in, and for depending on what you're doing, I was making a video, but you might need it to show up on something. You might need to make the lettering bigger. So sometimes you think, yeah, I've got it right, I've done it on paper, but when you actually stitch it, it doesn't look quite how you thought it would. So this was an example of that, of me trying a different size until I got the size that I needed. Now, something that I'm quite keen on doing in my embroidery is doing something with the background. So painting the background or adding something to the background to enhance the embroidery. So this is an example of where I've done that. You may be very familiar with this one. This is our silk shading pansy video, and you can see my practice ones here. So this is the finished one, and these are my practice ones. So I had the shape of my pansy. This has actually been printed on here, and I wanted to try out how to do the leaves on this. So I wanted the video to be about the long and short stitch in the flower, but a pansy doesn't look like a pansy without a leaf, so I wanted to put a leaf on it but not do it in long and short stitch. So I thought, well, I'll just outline it, and then I thought, well, that doesn't look quite right, so I actually coloured it in with coloured pencil. Here's a slightly darker one here, and outlined it, and then this is a finer outline. So I just did a couple of experiments to see what looked best for this leaf. I've also done a couple of sections trying the long and short and just testing the colours out while I'm there. You can see I haven't done very much, didn't need to, just to work out that colour combination before I did the finished thing. And then when I actually came to do the finished thing, I even painted my background fabric. So this is quite a dark green, and I wanted it to show up a little bit more on it. So I even made a decision between here and here. I didn't sample that, I didn't practice that, but I knew from this practice piece that I wanted this to be slightly different. So I actually painted this fabric myself with watercolour paint, and then painted the leaves on and then stitched around the leaves. So you can see that sort of progression between trying it out on here and doing it on the final piece. So I mentioned earlier about trying out different techniques, and sometimes you might want a piece of fabric just for that technique. It might need a specific kind of a fabric, or you just might want to have it all in one place. So here's a couple of techniques that I have done that with. So this one is my ribbon sample piece, and I actually kept this on a frame, and it was on a frame for a long while until I needed the frame for something else, and I just painted it green. I don't know why particularly, because it wasn't going to be anything. And this was purely where I practiced my silk ribbon stitches. So if I wanted to try a different stitch in silk ribbon, I grabbed this frame and I did it on this frame. And as you can see, I haven't really worried about what order. Some of them are facing that way, some are facing that way. So I've turned the frame round and to reach whichever part I can. It's made quite a nice sampler in the end, but it was not intended to do that. It was literally, I want to try a piece, a stitch out in silk ribbon, and this is where I tried it. So I've got all my samplers in one place, so then if I want to do a new piece of silk ribbon embroidery, I can grab this piece of fabric and I can look at the stitch and go, what was nice, what worked, what didn't work, what colour combination was nice, and they're all in one place, rather than going, there's one flower on there and another flower on there and they all get separated. So sometimes it can be nice to do that, is to have them all together so you've got an actual reference piece that you can use. So another technique I did that for was canvas work, and I was teaching some knot gardens, and I wanted a little sampler used for the class so I could try some different sections. And I did have this idea that I would draw out a little garden, actually the wrong way up, just turn that way up, and you can just see a fuchsia here, and there's a little plant urn here, and I had this idea that I'd do these little samplers and then I'd go home and finish it and make this amazing sampler. And as you can see, that didn't happen. which I think is a good thing, because that was not the idea of it. So it was to try some different stitches out, and if you don't allow yourself somewhere to try it out, you don't get experimental, you don't make the mistakes that you need to make to learn. It is important to allow yourself space to make mistakes and learn that way, because it is the best way to learn. So you can see I've tried a few leaves, random ones. This one didn't work, something really terrible happened in the middle, but at least I've done that on the sampler and not on my finished thing, so it doesn't matter. Trying out some beads on some stitches, some French knots, and that was all I needed to do to try that French knot out, to see if that worked as a kind of a gravel texture. I didn't need to fill in the whole square, so I got a bit enthusiastic about how much I thought I could do, really. So just enough to try it out. And then I just want to show you these 3 little knot gardens that I did for a class, and just to show you the result of that experimenting. So when I came to do these 3 pieces, I knew what I wanted to do on them. I had a sampler with some stitches on that I'd already tried, and I thought, yeah, I can take that stitch for this and that for this, and I knew they would work because I'd already tried them out. I'd already worked out how many threads I needed to cover this particular canvas, and what stitches and colours I wanted to put in there. So just that little bit of practice on that canvas meant that I could make these 3 designs, and without having to work it all out again. So I just want to show you one more technique where I have practiced it first and made a sampler. So this is drawn and pulled work. So this is a white work technique, but I did it on canvas. So I used to teach a lot of classes in America, in Portland, and for a needlepoint shop, and they wanted to do their pieces on needlepoint canvas, but wanted to try something new on it. So that was always a challenge for me. I don't necessarily know how to do different techniques on canvas, things that you wouldn't normally do on canvas. So we did quite a lot of experimenting and playing, but it did mean I had to try things out first because I just didn't know how they were going to work. So this is one that I did, and this is drawn and pulled, as I said. So I just want to show you the finished little samples first. So you draw the threads out from the middle here, and then you put stitches back in and make different patterns, and add beads to it, and make these beautiful designs. Here's another one here, underneath with the ribbon through the middle, and I've got some beads on the corner. I can't just sit down and magic that up, I had to try it, so I just want to show you my little sampler for those. So you can see it's not a thing of beauty, and you have to cut quite a lot of threads away to practice in the first place, so it is a little bit more time consuming this, but this is one of those techniques, you're cutting threads, you don't want to do it without practicing it first because you're going to cut the wrong thing. So you can see how I cut 4 out, and they're all at fairly different stages. This one's got the ribbon through, the ribbon isn't even finished off. That's not, I didn't need to practice finishing the ribbon off. I knew how to do that. I needed to practice how to get the ribbon through the stitches. So you just do the minimum that you need to do. If you want to turn it into a beautiful finished thing afterwards because you think, actually, that looks really great, you can, but keep this in mind that this is a tool for you to use to practice what you want to create. So I just went down the edge with some stitches, didn't need to go all the way around, just a cross stitch. This buttonhole edging was an issue of not having the right amount of thread in it. So I didn't need to keep doing it till I needed more thread. I knew this wasn't enough, so double it up. Just trying some stitches here, didn't finish the ends off because I practiced that over here. And this one was to try a bit of weaving. I either didn't like that and at a time or something, because that was as far as I got. So that's the little sampler that I used to try those techniques. And then I just want to show you the big design we did from that, just to show you how these stages fit together. So let me show you that one. So we've got my small blue sampler where I'm practicing cutting and practicing weaving the ribbon through and trying some different stitches. Then I got my 2 small samplers where you put all those techniques together just to verify they all work. And then from that came this one. So this is a large piece that we did, and this has just got a bit of everything going on it. But here's these designs, and on the 4 sides you can see these have been developed from those samples I've just shown you. And you couldn't really just sit down and do these out of your head. You need to have some sort of practice first to know what you're doing and to know where to place it. This is quite geometrical. It needs to work out where each element was going so that it was all in line. And I've got other stitches in here, and there's other techniques as well. There's a bit of stump work going on as well in here. And especially if you're going to mix techniques together, what order do you do them in? There's no right or wrong answer to that. You may need to work it out first, and the only way to work it out is to try it. So just wanted to finish on that piece just so you could see the whole process, and that I haven't magicked this up out of thin air. I'm not that clever, I'm afraid. Spoil the illusion. There's a lot of working out gone into all of the pieces that I do to make sure that they're what I want at the end. Okay, so what do you need to be able to do some sampling? So it does depend on what you want to sample, obviously, but just for some basic stitches, if you want to try out a stitch or try out a combination, all you need is a bit of fabric and a ring frame. People always ask me, what fabric do I practice on? Most of mine are just pieces of cotton calico, dead cheap cotton. Do use a natural fabric, a cotton or a linen or a blend of the two. To practice on. When I've just got it in a ring frame, I've got a different variety of needles on here. If I want to change the thickness of thread, I can up the size of the needle, and then a pair of scissors to cut your threads with. That is literally all you need to practice some stitches on, and I keep that with me. I can grab it and I can just go, oh, I just need to try that, 2 seconds, yeah, that's great, and I can carry on. It really is just a working tool for me to use to try things out. Obviously, if you want to try different fabrics, you're going to need to have different fabrics available to try on. You don't have to put them in a hoop. You can try them in your hand if you want to, and different threads and different backgrounds. You might want to get paints out and all that sort of thing. But you just need the basics. You don't need to be really fancy. It doesn't need to get expensive. That's not the point of it. You can practice in cheap threads as well. You don't need to practice in your best silk threads. Gold, you will really need to practice with the gold threads, but you only need to do a little bit to work out how to do it. So it's very accessible, and I recommend everybody has one of these to hand, and you have fun playing and practicing and experimenting and enjoying your embroidery process. So I hope you found this video a bit enlightening, and you're inspired to have a go at sampling, and it takes away some of those fears that you have of starting or getting it wrong or not knowing what to do. It's especially great for beginners because that can be daunting when you're learning everything all at once. But I've been doing embroidery for years now, and I still use this all the time. All my videos have a little sampler where I'm trying things out and making sure it's the right. So it's suitable for everybody. So grab yourself a frame, get some fabric, and do have fun experimenting with that. And if you've enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up. That helps more people to see it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.